Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and open source news show. This week we've got Firefox finally bringing their AI stuff inside of the latest nightly builds, and it doesn't look like it's excellent. We've got Wayland adding a protocol that lets you restore windows at their right position and the right sizes, fixing one of the major annoyances of Wayland for people who like to interact with a lot of windows. And we've got Framework opening up the pre-orders for their Framework Laptop 12, but not in the US. Plus a lot of other Linux related news, and also this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton Mail. You know about them probably. You know that they offer a fully end-to-end encrypted and zero-access encrypted email solution, but they also have a complete platform of services to do your calendar, your email, your contacts, your online storage, your password managers, and even your VPN, all with one single account that cannot be accessed even by Proton employees. They've got all the features that you'd expect to protect your privacy, but also to help you actually do your job. And while the base account is free, they of course have paid plans if you need more storage and more features. Proton Mail is what I use for all my personal email, calendar, and contacts, and I've been using them for more than a year now. I'm very happy with the service, and if you want to take advantage of all of this privacy and all of these features, the link is in the description. So, people interested in AI will be happy to know that Firefox 139's nightly builds now include the experimental web link preview feature that Mozilla had been talking about when they said they wanted more AI. It's basically a way to generate an AI summary of an article that's behind a link that you're hovering over. So you don't have to click that link, open it in a new tab and read it yourself. You can instead just ask Firefox to summarize what the content behind that link says, thus getting a heavily misunderstood version of that content and not supporting the person who wrote that article, in the end making them not able to keep writing that content and making the web a worse place in the process. Now, of course, if we postulate that every single article will be written by AI in 5 years, then you're just using AI to summarize what another AI bot has written, and at that point you're not hurting anyone anymore because there's no one left to hurt. Now, doom-mongering aside though, OMG Ubuntu seems to think that this thing isn't that good. It's apparently pretty slow to generate all these summaries because it's all done on device, so depending on your computer, it can be relatively speedy or very slow. And OMG Ubuntu also seem to indicate that the summaries are very often inaccurate, something Mozilla actually warns you about, saying that the key points might have mistakes and are devoid of humor, nuance, or originality. The feature can still be enabled if you want to try it out. In the About config page, you can enable the browser.ml.linkpreview.enabled property. You set it to true, and then you can toggle that feature by pressing Shift plus Alt and hovering over a link, something Firefox will definitely change before the final release to make it easier to activate when they decide that this is good enough for everyone. Of course, the feature is experimental, so you should not expect it to work properly, you should not expect it to be super fast or very interesting or accurate, and also it's AI, so always take what it generates with a big fat grain of salt. I'm not a fan of this AI direction, I must say. Hopefully, they use an ethical model to do this, something fully open source, trained on an ethically sourced dataset with open data, not something that they stole off of the internet or bought from another company, but I could not find any details on how they powered it, so if you find that, let me know in the comments. Now this week, Wayland gained another protocol, a big one, that should fix one big remaining annoyance. The top-level tag protocol lets Wayland clients, so applications, set a specific tag for their windows. These tags can then be used once the app is restarted to get some persistent information, like the position on screen of the application, its size, the fact that it's always on top or on a specific workspace, or specific compositor rules. Basically, this protocol allows for a full session restore or application and window properties restore, where closed applications can remember their size and position on screen even after a reboot, something that has been annoying on Wayland since the beginning of this thing, because While it's not a lot of work to resize and move your windows around, it's better if you don't have to do it, especially if you start your session with 10 or 15 different apps. Kwin already has a first implementation, so do Mutter and GTK, and the way it handles things is relatively simple. The application just needs to be updated to actually implement the protocol and set the tag, and then the compositor itself can associate attributes to that tag and restore these attributes every time an application is reopened. So applications will need to do a little bit of work, but it doesn't look like it's a lot, and it is a pretty major feature, so I would expect every maintained app that actually wants to work on Wayland to implement that little tag, and I would expect all compositors to implement a way to store properties related to that tag, and so restore Windows properly. It's a good thing. I wasn't that impressed by it initially, but my Patreon supporters and YouTube members told me that it is actually a very, very major pain point for a lot of people. So while personally it doesn't really affect me because I work with 2 or 3 windows, for developers who have like 20 things opened on 3 different monitors, it is definitely going to be a game changer. Now let's talk about laptops. The Framework Laptop 12 is now open for pre-orders for €569 or $719 Canadian. So the laptop itself comes in 5 colorways for the do-it-yourself edition, and it comes in black only for pre-made laptops, although assembling that laptop yourself is going to be very, very easy, so I would go for that one and pick a nice color. Don't have all your electronics black, white or gray. It's better to have some colorful stuff. This laptop is obviously a 12-inch one because it's the Framework Laptop 12, and you get either an i3 or an i5 CPU, 13th gen of the U series, so low power consumption but also not the most powerful CPUs out there. It can go up to 2 TB of SSD, up to 48 gigs of RAM, it got Wi-Fi 6E, and 4 slots for your usual Framework expansion cards, plus the headphone jack that you'd expect. The display is LCD 1920 by 1200 and the laptop weighs 1.3 kilos, which is relatively heavy for a 12-inch laptop, but Framework generally has very solid build quality with very nice materials, so that's to be expected. Really nice to see Framework expanding their line of devices. 12-inch might not seem very different from 13-inch, but in terms of footprint, it does make a difference, and generally these laptops work really well with Linux, so that's cool. Now, if you've been following me for a while, or if you just started listening to this episode, you know that I am very critical of AI tools. But this time, I have to give them a little bit of praise. Security Copilot, a Microsoft tool using AI, detected 20 vulnerabilities on Grub2, on U-Boot, and on Bearbox, all open source bootloaders. And these are vulnerabilities that no one had found previously. In Grub specifically, it is 11 vulnerabilities, and these impact all devices that run UEFI Secure Boot, letting attackers bypass protections to run any code on any computer. This can be done with local access, but it could also be done using bootkits, especially in the case of Grub, where you could even use the flaws to bypass encryption of a Windows partition, for example, using BitLocker. Microsoft says that using their AI tool saved them about 1 week of analysis time from a human, and that the AI provided mitigation recommendations for these vulnerabilities to at least give an avenue to explore to fix the problems. These things have been disclosed to the project back in February, so if you're up to date on your own updates, you likely already have those fixes. Now, this is both good and bad. It's good because open source projects generally don't really have that much time to dedicate to finding security vulnerabilities, and those tools might let them detect them a bit earlier. But it's also bad because if they can use those tools, malicious hackers can also do so. And as soon as a malicious person starts using those AI tools to detect vulnerabilities in your code, then as the developer, you sort of have to use the same tools on your own code to make sure that at the very least this avenue is blocked and you're not giving a free ride to anyone who wants to hack into your project or to find a problem specifically. It's also really, really bad because this is still a Microsoft tool trained on unethically sourced code. Basically, they pilfered GitHub without asking for authorization, and so that's still absolutely horrendous. But at the very least, it served one purpose, one time. Speaking of open source code, Nvidia opened a lot more stuff this week, specifically code for PhysX and Flow, the code that handles GPU acceleration for those things. PhysX was already open source as the SDK itself, but the part that handled GPU simulation, so the part you actually want, because this is definitely something you want to have accelerated, well, that part was not open, and now it is. It seems to use the same BSD3 license that the PhysX SDK is licensed under, and if you don't know, PhysX is a library that lets game developers build realistic hair, fur, cloth movement, but also ragdolls, particles, vehicle dynamics, basically everything that mimics how gravity or physical forces affect physical elements. They also opened the GPU compute shader implementation of Flow. Flow being their SDK that handles fluid simulations. All the code is on Nvidia's GitHub. They apparently actively encourage people to create issues on that code. And I know Nvidia sucks for the most part, but at the very least, they've been showing some inclination to go more towards open source in recent years. They're still not really part of the upstream development process. It's not like their driver is straight contributed to Mesa, it's still an external thing that is basically incompatible with the Mesa architecture, but also the Linux kernel architecture, so they're not doing everything well, but at least they're opening up some stuff. I think that's good. Now let's conclude the episode with some pretty interesting gaming news this week. First, we've got Wine 10.5. It fixes a few things to run Windows apps on Asahi Linux, on Apple's ARM CPUs, because it now supports larger page sizes on ARM64, and it specifically fixes a bug for Asahi Linux to make sure that things run well here. On top of that, the Mono engine sees the usual updates, the Bluetooth driver for Wine now supports pairing devices, which is useful for Bluetooth, Vulkan H.264 decoding is implemented, so videos can be played using the GPU instead of the CPU if they use that codec, and you also get 22 bug fixes, including, for some reason, for Microsoft Edge. Now we also have one less thing to worry about when it comes to running recent games on older hardware on Linux, at least on AMD hardware. There's been an update to the AMD Vulkan drivers that lets it emulate ray tracing support if it's not physically capable of doing ray tracing. So if your GPU does not work with ray tracing, well, you can masquerade as if you are able to do that. So games that absolutely require ray tracing, like the latest Indiana Jones title, can still function on Linux. Apparently, performance with that emulated ray tracing is good enough for that specific game, although there is no guarantee that other games will perform as well in the future with this emulation. So starting with Mesa 25.1, if your AMD GPU does not have any physical hardware ray tracing capabilities, but if you're trying to play a game that requires that, the game should still run normally. That's for all Polaris GPUs and a few other architectures. It's basically the RX 480, 530, 550, 570, and 580, plus the Radeon R9 285 and the Radeon 520 and 530. That's a pretty cool bit of extra support here for a specific use case, but that's going to be more and more generalized as AAA titles really start to assume everyone has a ray tracing capable device. It also might mean that the Steam Deck won't be as outdated in the future if it can at least deliver solid enough performance with that emulated ray tracing, which isn't guaranteed. Now, it's still a confirmation that Linux is the absolute best platform for gaming on older hardware because you can't upgrade to the latest Windows version. Your Windows drivers will never give you that sort of capability, but on Linux, it just works. And finally, we also had some recent leaks on the new VR headsets from Valve, and it looks like it's not that far away. It was anticipated for the end of 2025, but it apparently could come sooner. Relatively trustworthy sources for leaks on VR-related stuff indicated that Valve has received shipments for facial interfaces since the end of last year, and those interfaces are only used for VR-related hardware. And they also can't be for the Valve Index because this thing is no longer produced and hasn't been for a while. Other leaks also are saying that this new Valve VR headset would be a fully standalone thing, so you wouldn't need to plug it into a separate computer, Although I do hope it still supports that, because at some point when the internal hardware gets too old and it cannot play modern games, it would be good to at least have access to it as just a headset and not a fully autonomous headset. So hopefully they'll retain the capability to plug it into a computer into just a pass-through sort of mode. Now, second, this thing would also let you play games that aren't VR optimized. So much like virtually every VR headset I've ever heard of, but it's interesting that they mentioned that, you would basically be able to play any title just like if it was projected on a movie theater screen in front of you instead of having a VR optimized specific experience. Of course, that headset would run SteamOS. That's fully expected, and it would come with the new controllers that were leaked a while back. The price, though, of this headset might make people a lot less interested in it, because it's apparently going to be around $1,200 with a few bundled games, but it's still a lot of money. And I am very interested in this VR headset. The last one I owned and used was the PlayStation VR, the original one. It was great, it worked really well, but first, I didn't have a lot of room to play in. Second, there were like 5 or 6 titles that I really enjoyed on this, and then I sold it because there was nothing else coming for it. So things have progressed since then. I haven't played Half-Life Alyx, and there are a lot of other titles that look interesting in VR. I now have a lot more room to play around in as well, so I would absolutely purchase this thing, especially since it runs Linux, which is awesome. Awesome, just like our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. Now, you probably all know about Tuxedo by now if you've been listening to any of my shows or watching any of my videos. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They do all the work to make sure that all that hardware runs Linux perfectly. They even contribute open source drivers so everyone can benefit. I only use Tuxedo Computers these days. Everything from my YouTube channel to my podcast to my other YouTube channel in French are all done on a Tuxedo laptop. All my gaming needs are served by one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube, and I can only recommend them. They're really good. They have something for everyone, every need, every price point. There's a lot of customization options. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, you want to ensure Linux runs well, and you want to give your money to a company that actually contributes to Linux, click the link in the description and check out Tuxedo Computers. They're really, really good. So this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed watching or listening to it. As always, you know where all the usual YouTube buttons are. Do click those like buttons, subscribe buttons, comments, whatever. It really, really helps the channel grow and it helps me make more of these videos. If you want to support the show, there are plenty of links in the description to do just that. And in the meantime, I guess you'll see me in the next video. Bye!